My name is Samantha Power. I'm a journalist in Edmonton, Alberta, located on Treaty 6 territory. I'll be reading from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. This is within the history section on the school experience, and it details the work done by children within residential schools. The section is titled Work, No Idleness Here, and it's located on page 77 to 79 within the printed edition and 80 to 83 in the online edition. Student education was further undermined by the amount of work the students had to do to support the schools. Because Indian Affairs officials had anticipated that the residential schools would be self-sufficient, students were expected to raise or grow and prepare much of the food they ate, to make and repair much of their clothing, and to maintain the schools. As a result, most of the residential schools operated on what was referred to as the half-day system. Under this system, which amounted to institutionalized child labor, students were in class for half the day and in what was supposed to be vocational training for the other half. Often, as many students, teachers, and inspectors observed, the time allocated for vocational training was actually spent in highly repetitive labor that provided little in the way of training. Rather, it served to maintain the school operations. The half-day system was not a formally mandated system. Some schools did not use it, and those that did use it implemented it on their own terms. When in 1922, Indian Affairs Education official Russell Ferrier recommended that the Chapleau, Ontario school implement the half-day system, he had to rely on his memory of visits to other schools in order to describe how the system operated. Indian Affairs had no official written description of the system. This is telling evidence of the haphazard way in which residential schools were managed. While the half-day system was supposed to apply only to the older students, the reality was that every student worked. Above and beyond the half-day that students spent in vocational training, it was not uncommon for them to perform daily chores both before and after school. As a result, students often spent more than half a day working for the school. At High River, Alberta, in the 1880s, students who were not learning a trade were expected to put in 2 hours a day of chores in the winter and 4 hours in the summer. According to Principal E. Claude, quote, "To these youngest ones pertained the weeding of the garden and the housework on their side of the school, and I must say that this summer none denied our watchword, 'No idleness here,' as all work was exclusively done by the pupils." Quote, "From the time the schools were opened, parents and inspectors raised concerns about just how much work students were being required to do. Inspector T.P. Wadsworth claimed in 1884 that the boys at the Battleford School generally enjoyed their chores, but added that he would protest against, quote, 'forcing these little fellows to haul water every day and all day from the river in winter, as was the case last year,' unquote." In 1886, Qu'Appelle School principal Joseph Huguenard wrote, quote, "During the summer they have more manual labor and recreation. The parents cannot understand that the pupils are here to learn how to work as well as to read and write. We therefore cannot at present devote too much time to the former," unquote. Inspector Wadsworth returned to the issue of overwork in 1893 when he said that much of the farm work at the Middle Church Manitoba School was too much for the boys. The girls were also set to work in the laundry at a, quote, "tender age." Gilbert Watoonie, who attended the Battleford School in the first decade of the 20th century, recalled, quote, "They didn't do any farm work or any work until you got to, at that time, Standard 3, whether you were 9 years old or 15 years old," unquote. After he turned 9, he, quote, "never saw another full day of school until I left," unquote. By then, the school had drastically reduced the number of trades it taught. Quote, "There was just blacksmithing, carpentering, and farming," unquote. According to Lillian Elias, each fall a barge would arrive in Aklavik, loaded with logs for the school furnace. The students would form a long chain leading from the barge to the furnace room and with the assistance of the school staff unload the barge. The work was inadequately supervised and often dangerous. There are accounts of students getting hands caught in power equipment in the school laundries, the kitchens, workshops, and fields. Principals tended to place the blame on student carelessness and neglected to report such injuries to the government. Several injuries were recorded only after the student's parents complained or the government received a bill for the hospital treatment of a student. In December 1935, a mangle, a type of clothes wringer at the Clubhouse School, crushed several fingers on Florence McLeod's right hand, which were amputated. The school principal, G. Leonard, stressed that, quote, "This mangle has been in use at this school for several years and all the girls are familiar with its operation," unquote. Indian Affairs Secretary A.F. Mackenzie concluded that, quote, "All the necessary precautions were taken, and while the accident to Florence McLeod is regretted, it was through no fault of the school management," unquote. The school's failure to protect its students can be seen in the fact that McLeod's father, Henry, had been injured in a similar fashion when he was a student at the same school. In 1941, a 12-year-old boy lost all the fingers on one hand in an accident in the Brandon, Manitoba school barn. 8 years later, 15-year-old Rodney Beardy died in a tractor accident at the same school. A student at the Edmonton school lost a foot in 1944 after an accident during the operation of a machine used in the preparation of fodder. 2 boys from the Birtle, Manitoba school were injured in a truck accident in 1942. From Indian Affairs correspondence, it appears that the accident involved a truck carrying 70 boys who were being taken from the school to the fields to do farm work. Indian Affairs official R.A. Huey criticized the principal for allowing the practice to take place, noting that, quote, "It is almost unbelievable that the principal should permit 70 pupils to be conveyed in a truck," unquote. Even though the half-day system was supposedly eliminated in the early 1950s, students continued to be overworked. After Sam Ross ran away from the Birtle School in 1959, he told Indian Affairs official J.R. Bell that he wanted to continue his education but had been forced to work too hard at the school. He said that from September to Christmas the previous year, he had worked in the school barn every day between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m., and from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., again at recess from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., and had to stoke up the furnace with coal at 10 o'clock before retiring. Ross said that, quote, "He liked school, but not working like a hired hand," unquote. Bell recommended that the amount of student labor being done at the Birtle School be investigated. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this section of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. Please take the time to engage your friends and political leaders and pay attention to this report and the recommendations contained within. Thank you.